My daughter smiled too sweetly as she slid the plate toward me. "Eat up, Dad," she said lightly. "It's something special." Her husband stood beside her, watching me with that same polite smile he always wore, the kind that never quite reached his eyes. And in that exact moment, sitting at my own dining table, I knew something was wrong. Not because of the food, not because of the way it looked or smelled to anyone else, but because I had spent 44 years of my life working with chemicals, compounds, and medications, long enough to know when danger is hiding behind courtesy. But before I continue, take a moment and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I am 71 years old. People see the gray hair, the slow movements, the careful way I lower myself into a chair, and they assume I am harmless, forgetful, easy. They forget that old age does not dull instinct. It sharpens it. I lifted my fork, pretending nothing was amiss, while my son-in-law, Marcus Hale, took his seat across from me. He folded his hands, expectant, waiting. "You cooked?" I asked casually. "Yes," he said. "Thought I'd do something nice for once." That alone should have told me everything. Marcus had been married to my daughter, Elaine, for almost 7 years. In that time, I had never once seen him cook anything more complicated than frozen meals. He treated the kitchen like a hostile environment. Yet here he was, serving braised lamb in a dark wine sauce, plated carefully, garnished with herbs. People call it intuition. I call it pattern recognition. I leaned forward and breathed in gently. To most people, it would have smelled rich and savory. To me, beneath the aroma, there was something faint, bitter, medicinal, out of place. A ghost of a scent that does not belong anywhere near a dinner table. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. Experience teaches you that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. "Smells impressive," I said. "What did you put in the sauce?" Marcus chuckled. "Family secret." Elaine stared down at her plate, pushing food around without eating. She did not look at me. She had not looked at me properly in weeks. That was another sign. Silence can be louder than shouting. I raised my fork slowly, brought a piece closer to my mouth, close enough to confirm what I already suspected. Sedatives. A strong dose. Enough to make an elderly man slip quietly into cardiac failure and have it written off as natural causes. I had filled thousands of prescriptions in my life. I had caught counterfeit pills, mislabeling, intentional overdoses. I had testified in fraud cases. I knew the smell of danger the way a sailor knows a coming storm. Marcus was watching me now, waiting for me to swallow. That is when I understood something even more chilling. This was not an impulsive act. This was rehearsed. So I smiled. I nodded approvingly, and I took a bite. Or rather, I pretended to, because when Marcus reached for the wine bottle and turned his back for just a moment, I did something that changed the course of every life in that room. I switched the plates. Smoothly, quietly, without hesitation. Decades of steady hands do not abandon you when you need them most. When he turned back, he saw exactly what he expected to see: an old man eating his dinner, unaware that this was supposed to be his last meal. What happened next would expose a betrayal months in the making. Because this story is not just about poison. It is about what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness and forget that some old men survive precisely because they pay attention. They say you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. What they do not say is that an old dog who spent over 4 decades behind a pharmacy counter can smell danger long before it bares its teeth. I did not always live with my daughter and her husband. This was my house, the one my late wife and I bought 40 years earlier, back when interest rates were brutal and hope was cheap. We raised Elaine here. We buried my wife from this house. Every corner held memory, routine, familiarity. After my wife passed, Elaine insisted I should not live alone. "You shouldn't be by yourself, Dad," she said. "Let's move in. We'll take care of each other." It sounded loving, reasonable. Marcus had nodded enthusiastically, his arm around her shoulders. Family sticks together. I believed them. That was my first mistake. Marcus worked in sales, the kind of job where charm mattered more than honesty. He was good at first impressions and terrible at follow-through. He spoke confidently about future opportunities that never quite arrived. Elaine, my bright, once independent daughter, had slowly changed since marrying him. Not drastically, not enough to alarm anyone on the outside. Just enough. She grew quieter, more cautious, less willing to disagree. Small things at first. She would leave the room when I entered, avoid conversations about finances, brush off questions about Marcus's work. And Marcus, he had developed a sudden interest in my affairs. "How's your health been, old-timer?" he would ask with a grin. "Still kicking," I would reply. He would laugh too loudly, like the joke was funnier than it should be. One afternoon in early spring, I noticed something odd about my wine. I had a modest collection, nothing extravagant, but carefully curated. Bottles from Oregon, Washington, a few special ones saved from trips overseas. I knew them well. That evening, I poured myself a glass from a bottle I had opened many times before. It tasted wrong, metallic, bitter, unbalanced. I dumped it down the sink and blamed a faulty cork. These things happen. 2 days later, Marcus mentioned reorganizing the cellar. "Thought I'd help out," he said. "Alphabetize everything." He spent nearly an hour down there. At the time, I thanked him. Now, looking back, that was the second warning. Then came the medications. I have been on the same blood pressure prescription for years. Stable, effective, boring, the best kind of medicine. Marcus approached me one morning while I was making coffee. "You know," he said casually, "my college buddy works in pharmaceuticals now. He says a lot of those older meds are outdated. Might be worth switching." I told him my doctor was satisfied. He smiled. "Just thinking of your longevity." Longevity, a curious word choice. A week later, my pill bottles were returned to the cabinet with new labels. The formatting looked professional. The pills inside did not. Different size, different coating. I did not take them. I set them aside, quietly, and made a mental note. Elaine never asked why I stopped mentioning my medications. She never asked anything. By early summer, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Marcus took an interest in paperwork he had never cared about before: insurance documents, property tax letters, my will. "Everything sorted?" he asked once, over breakfast. "Just in case." I stared at him for a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said. "Everything is handled." He seemed relieved. That was when I realized something important. This was not about impatience. This was about entitlement. They had already decided what was theirs. I just happened to still be breathing. So when that dinner appeared on the table, that carefully prepared, uncharacteristic meal, it was not a surprise. It was confirmation, which is why I did not panic when I smelled the sedatives. Why I did not accuse. Why I did not refuse to eat. Because predators rely on one thing above all else: assumption. Marcus assumed I was old, grateful, unaware. He assumed I would do exactly what he expected. And when people assume, they stop watching. That night, as I chewed slowly on the untainted portion of his dinner, I watched him consume every bite meant for me. I watched the clock, and I waited. People imagine that moments of danger are loud. Shouting, crashing, chaos. In reality, the most dangerous moments are quiet. We made small talk while the clock moved forward. Elaine asked about the roses in the yard. Marcus bragged about a deal he claimed was about to close. I listened politely, nodding at the appropriate moments, chewing slowly, counting minutes in my head. Sedatives like the ones I smelled rarely work instantly. They creep. They soften the edges of awareness first, then pull the body downward like gravity, increasing a fraction at a time. At around the 30-minute mark, Marcus stopped talking. He blinked hard, rubbed his temples. "You all right?" Elaine asked, concern flickering across her face. "Just dizzy," he said. "Probably the wine." I nodded. "Could be." You poured generously. Another 5 minutes passed. Marcus's words began to slur. His posture sagged, confidence leaking out of him with every breath. Elaine's voice sharpened. "Marcus, you're scaring me." He tried to stand. He made it halfway up before his knees buckled, and he collapsed back into the chair, breathing heavy, eyes unfocused. That was when panic finally arrived, but not for me. "What's happening?" Elaine cried, rushing to his side. I rose calmly and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Should I call for help?" I asked evenly. "Yes," she said, near hysteria. "Call someone. Call emergency services." I did. I explained that my son-in-law appeared to be having a severe reaction to dinner, that he was breathing but disoriented. The operator told me help was on the way. By the time the paramedics arrived, Marcus was barely conscious. His breathing was slow but steady, classic heavy sedation. Dangerous, but not immediately fatal for a man his age and build. They lifted him onto a stretcher, asked questions, checked vitals. Elaine insisted on riding with them. "Dad," she said hurriedly at the door, mascara already smudging. "Can you clean up? I'll call you from the hospital." "Of course," I replied. "Take your time." The door closed. Silence returned. I stood alone in the dining room, staring at two plates. The one that should have killed me, and the one that had nearly killed him. I did not celebrate. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was clarity. For 44 years, I had dispensed medications to heal people. I had warned patients about interactions, overdoses, side effects. I had seen how ignorance could harm and how intent could destroy. Marcus had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This was not a misunderstanding. This was attempted murder. I cleaned methodically, not like a frightened man, like a professional. Each plate went into a separate paper bag, labeled with the date and time. The leftover meat, the sauce, the wine bottle, everything preserved. Evidence does not help you if you destroy it. By midnight, Elaine still had not called. I sat in my study, reviewing the past few months with fresh eyes. The wine, the medications, the questions about my will. This was a progression. Testing. Refinement. Escalation. My phone buzzed close to 2 in the morning. "Elaine, he's stable," she said, voice shaking. "They say it was some kind of reaction. They're keeping him overnight." "What kind of reaction?" I asked. "They're not sure. Something about elevated levels." They asked what he ate. "And what did you tell them?" "That he cooked dinner." That was the truth, though not the whole truth. "They think maybe the meat was bad," she added. "Bad meat does not cause pharmaceutical toxicity." "When are you coming home?" I asked. "In the morning." After we hung up, I opened a leather-bound notebook I had kept since my pharmacy days. Documentation saves lives. I wrote down everything. Dates, times, observations, patterns. March, wine altered. April, medication substitution. June, poison dinner. I did not speculate. I recorded facts. When Elaine returned home just after sunrise, she looked exhausted. Marcus was stable. Doctors were running more tests. "He was asking about you," she said quietly. "How thoughtful." She flinched at that. "Dad," she said, "things have been tense. Marcus feels like you don't respect him." "Do you think he respects me?" She did not answer. Instead, she spoke about his work stress, his debts, the pressure he was under. Pressure does not excuse premeditation. When she went upstairs, I added another line to the notebook. Elaine's knowledge uncertain. Elaine's silence notable. By then, something inside me had changed. I was no longer simply defending myself. I was preparing. Because if this had been the first attempt, there would not be a second. But it was not the first. And there would be another. Unless I made absolutely certain there would not be. Sleep never came that night. I sat in my study long after dawn, the notebook open in front of me, coffee untouched beside it. Once you accept that someone intends to kill you, rest becomes irrelevant. Survival sharpens the mind far better than caffeine. I replayed the last few months slowly, methodically, the way I once reviewed adverse drug events. Not emotionally, but analytically. Patterns matter. In mid-spring, I had blamed a bad bottle of wine. Now I went back to the cellar. I pulled bottles from the back row, the ones Marcus had alphabetized. 3 corks sat slightly higher than the rest. Not enough for a casual eye to notice, but enough for mine. Removed. Reinserted. I opened one carefully and inhaled. There it was again, that faint metallic bitterness. I poured the contents down the drain and wrote another entry. Wine tampering. Multiple bottles. Spring. Next, the medications. I retrieved the bottles Marcus had updated and compared them to old pharmacy reference guides I still kept. The pills inside were not substitutes. There was something else entirely. Compounds that raised heart rate, interfered with rhythm, caused agitation. Not accidental. Deliberate. I broke one tablet open, tasted only enough to confirm, then rinse thoroughly. Medication substitution. Intentional. April. By the time Elaine came home that morning, I had already reconstructed the timeline. This was not desperation. This was planning. She moved around the kitchen quietly, avoiding my eyes. She poured herself coffee and did not drink it. Stanley, she corrected herself. Marcus is coming home tomorrow. Good, I said. Doctors figured out what caused it. They think it was food-related. I nodded, pretending acceptance. Then I watched her hands. They were shaking. She knew more than she was saying. Over the next few days, I observed everything. Marcus called frequently from the hospital. Elaine answered every time, stepping into another room. When I entered, conversations ended abruptly. On the third day, I overheard her say, "He's asking about the house again." That was when a final piece fell into place. The mail. I retrieved a letter I had dismissed weeks earlier, a bank notice warning of a suspicious mortgage inquiry on my property. At the time, I had assumed it was a scam. It was not. The application listed my house as collateral. The requested amount was well over $300,000. The signature looked like mine, close enough to fool an algorithm, not close enough to fool me. Forgery. I sat at my desk and felt something cold settle in my chest. This was not about care. This was about liquidation. They were not waiting for me to die peacefully. They were trying to accelerate the process. When Marcus returned home, he looked thinner but confident. Too confident. Predators often feel emboldened after a failed attempt, convinced they can refine their method. I play my part. Concerned. Generous. Oblivious. I offered financial help. Asked to review their expenses. Marcus agreed far too quickly, handing me access to accounts, emails, documents. Greed is a powerful anesthetic. That night, while they slept, I reviewed everything. Credit card debt, gambling losses, missed payments, and then I found it. An email chain between Marcus and a real estate developer. They had already discussed a sale price for my home, just under $1 million. Timeline, before end of summer. Another message followed. Elaine's reply, "I don't know if I can do this." Marcus's response, "We don't have a choice. Just stay quiet." I read it 3 times. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether my daughter was merely blind. She knew. She may not have mixed the poison herself, but she knew it was there. And she said nothing. Silence, when paired with knowledge, is participation. I documented everything. Screenshots, copies, dates. Then I installed cameras. Discreet ones, legal ones. If they were going to act again, and they would, I needed proof no one could argue with. The next week confirmed everything. My vitamins changed shape. My tea tasted off. Even the soap in my bathroom caused a rash. Small exposures. Testing boundaries. Adjusting doses. I recorded it all. By the end of that week, I was no longer asking if there would be another attempt. I was waiting for when. And I knew something else too. The next one would not be a test. It would be fatal, unless I was ready. The second attempt came sooner than I expected. Predators grow impatient when their plans stall. It was a Friday evening, late June, warm enough that the windows were open and the house smelled faintly of cut grass and summer dust. Marcus emerged from the kitchen wearing that same carefully rehearsed smile. "Francis," he said, suddenly respectful, "I've been thinking a lot since the hospital. About family. About us. I made dinner again. A peace offering." Elaine stood behind him, her expression unreadable. The dish was the same as before, braised meat and wine sauce, but refined. Cleaner presentation. Sharper aroma. He had practiced. I sat at the table, heart steady, senses alert. When I leaned forward to inhale, I detected it immediately. Not just sedatives this time. Something else layered beneath, a cardiac compound. In the right dose, it regulated rhythm. In the wrong dose, it stopped hearts cleanly and quietly. This was not meant to incapacitate. This was meant to kill. Elaine did not eat. She pushed food around her plate, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. Marcus ate confidently, but not from the same pan. That told me everything. When he excused himself to retrieve wine, I moved. The plate switched again, smooth, precise, practiced. When Marcus returned, I was cutting into what had been his portion. He smiled, satisfied. "I really nailed it this time," he said. "You did. I replied. We ate mostly in silence. I watched the clock. At just under half an hour, Marcus's fork slowed. He pressed a hand to his chest. Elaine, he said, voice tight, something's wrong. Her chair scraped back violently. What is it? What's happening? My heart, he gasped. It feels like it's racing. I stood calmly and reached for my phone. I'm calling emergency services. No, he tried to say, but the word fell apart halfway out of his mouth. He collapsed onto the couch, breathing shallow and rapid, eyes wide with dawning understanding. He knew. For the first time, he understood exactly what I had done, or rather, what I had not allowed him to do to me. The paramedics arrived quickly. Faster this time. They asked questions, checked vitals, administered oxygen. What did he eat? One asked. Dinner, I said. The meal he prepared himself. Elaine began to cry. I don't understand, she said. He's healthy. The paramedics exchanged looks. We're seeing signs consistent with drug toxicity, one said. We need to transport immediately. As they wheeled Marcus out, his eyes locked onto mine. There was fear there. Not fear of death. Fear of consequences. Later that night, my phone rang. Elaine, they found drugs in his system, she whispered. Sedatives and heart medication. They're asking questions. The police are involved. Good, I said softly. What? Nothing, I replied. I'll come down shortly. At the hospital, I was met not just by doctors, but by an old friend. Victor, my neighbor, my chess partner, a detective. This is the second poisoning from your address in a short span, he said quietly. We need to talk. In a private room, I showed him everything. The notebook, the emails, the forged mortgage, the security footage. Victor watched silently. This is premeditated, he said finally. Yes, and you switched the plates. I refuse to die, I said. What Marcus ate was what he prepared. Victor nodded slowly. We're executing a search warrant tonight. When Elaine was questioned, she asked for a lawyer. That was answer enough. As dawn approached, I sat alone again, not frightened, not angry. Resolved. The game had moved beyond survival. Now it was about truth. And once truth enters the room, lies begin to suffocate. The house felt different once the police left. Not empty, exposed. Evidence bags lined my dining table where Sunday dinners once sat. Officers moved carefully through each room, cataloging wine bottles, pill containers, electronics, documents. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was overlooked. Predators depend on chaos. Investigators do not. By dawn, Marcus was under guard in the hospital. Elaine had been questioned for hours. Neither was allowed to return home. Victor stayed behind after the others left. You did the right thing, he said, though his voice carried the weight of what came next. But understand this, Marcus will not go quietly. I wouldn't expect him to. Within 48 hours, his lawyer appeared. Expensive, aggressive, experienced. And their strategy was obvious from the first statement released to the press. They did not deny the poison. They redirected the blame. According to them, I was a manipulative, unstable old man, bitter, controlling, unwilling to let go of my house or my authority over my daughter. They said I orchestrated everything, that I contaminated the food myself, that I staged the incidents to frame Marcus. The news ran it uncritically. I watched one interview in my kitchen as Elaine sat beside her husband, crying on cue. My father has always been controlling, she said. He couldn't accept that I built a life without him. Every word was practiced. Every tear was strategic. I turned off the television. Henry Foster, my attorney, arrived that afternoon. Marcus is pushing hard, he said. They're asking the court to order a psychiatric evaluation for you, claiming paranoia and delusions. Let them, I said. Henry studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. That confidence will help. The evaluation was scheduled within the week, same doctor, same day, for both of us. Fairness has a way of exposing liars. While the media speculated, the investigation continued quietly. The forensic analysis confirmed it all. The substances found in Marcus's system matched compounds recovered from my kitchen. The pills substituted in my cabinet matched residue on his gloves. The wine bottles contained trace contamination consistent with tampering over several months. And the security footage, that sealed it. Marcus crushing tablets, mixing them into sauce, replacing pill bottles, testing dosages. There was no interpretation needed, only acknowledgement. The psychiatric evaluation took 3 hours. The doctor was thorough, calm, precise. At the end, she closed her notebook and said, "Mr. Hale displays manipulative traits and poor impulse control. Mr. Caldwell," she turned to me, "shows no cognitive impairment, paranoia, or delusional thinking. His actions were defensive and calculated." The report destroyed their narrative. So they tried another angle. Elder abuse. They claimed I had psychologically controlled Elaine for years, forcing her compliance. That collapsed the moment the financial records were entered into evidence. Marcus's debts were substantial. Hundreds of thousands in losses. Gambling. Speculative investments. And then came the revelation that silenced the courtroom. My finances. A long-term investment stake in a regional pharmacy group, valued well over $1 million. Income one had never mentioned. Assets Marcus had never known existed. The prosecution made the point clearly. I had no financial motive. Marcus did. The moment that truth surfaced, I watched something break behind his eyes. All that planning, all that risk, all that poison. For money he never needed to kill me to inherit. He had gambled everything and lost. The judge revoked bail. Marcus was taken into custody that afternoon. Elaine was charged as an accessory after the fact. As she was led away, she looked at me, not with anger, with regret. But regret does not resurrect trust. It does not undo silence, and it does not save you from consequences. The trial began in late summer, when the heat lingered longer than it should have, as if the season itself were reluctant to move on. By then, the story had escaped the boundaries of our neighborhood and taken on a life of its own. It traveled through social circles, news cycles, and whispered conversations in grocery store aisles. People who had once waved politely from their porches now avoided eye contact. Friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say or afraid of being implicated by proximity. Strangers, meanwhile, felt no such restraint. They felt entitled to opinions, to judgments, to certainty. Everyone wanted a villain and a victim, and for a while, the media could not decide which one I was. I understood their confusion. Stories like this rarely unfold the way people expect. There is comfort in simplicity, and what I offered instead was complexity. A woman who noticed, calculated, waited. A woman who did not scream or flee, but stayed at the table and watched carefully while someone tried to kill her. The courthouse was older than it looked, its stone facade softened by time and weather. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish, with an undercurrent of something sharper anticipation, perhaps, or fear. I arrived early each day, dressed plainly, carrying nothing but a folder of notes I never opened. I had already rehearsed everything that mattered in my mind. Marcus sat at the defense table when I entered, looking smaller than I remembered him. Pale, controlled. The confidence he once wore, so casually like a tailor jacket he assumed would always fit, had been replaced by calculation. That brittle, narrowed focus was the last refuge of a man who knows the evidence is not on his side but hopes, irrationally, that precision might still save him. Elaine sat behind him, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her posture rigid with practiced composure. She never looked at me. Not once. I noticed that more than I would have noticed anger. The judge entered promptly, a woman with a voice that carried authority without effort. When she spoke, the room listened. The jury followed her lead, settling into attention rather than spectacle. This was not a trial for theatrics. It was a trial for truth. The prosecution began with the timeline. Slow, methodical, unemotional. They started in the spring when the wine first tasted wrong. Not spoiled, exactly just altered. Metallic, faintly bitter. Easily dismissed, had I wanted to dismiss it. They showed purchase records, residue analysis, and text messages Marcus believed he had deleted. He had underestimated the permanence of digital footprints, much as he had underestimated my capacity for attention. Next came early summer, the medication substitution. The prosecution explained how routine prescriptions had been replaced with near-identical pills containing altered compounds. The dosages were small at first, deliberately so. Enough to induce dizziness, fatigue, confusion. Enough to make me doubt myself. Then came escalation. Sedatives introduced into meals. Traces of benzodiazepines in sauces and soups. Enough to slow reaction time, to soften resistance, to make accidents more likely. And finally, the attempt that would have ended everything. A lethal cardiac compound, carefully measured, intended to appear as a spontaneous failure. Something no one would question in a woman my age, particularly one with a documented history of recent weakness. Each step was supported by documentation, forensic reports, expert testimony, and video evidence. The prosecution did not rush. They did not need to. When the footage played Marcus crushing pills with the flat of a knife, mixing them carefully in his sauce, wiping down surfaces with practiced thoroughness, the courtroom went silent. There was no outrage, no gasps, no murmurs, only recognition. That is what guilt looks like when it can no longer hide. Ordinary, methodical, almost boring in its precision. Evil, stripped of drama, revealed as routine. Marcus did not react. He watched the screen with the same distant focus he might have given to a financial report or a weather forecast. Only his jaw betrayed him, tightening slightly as if to hold something back. The defense tried to reframe it. Stress, they said. Desperation. Marital pressure. Marcus's attorney spoke of debt and fear, of a man pushed to irrational choices by circumstances beyond his control. He painted a picture of panic, of a life unraveling too quickly for reason to intervene. The judge interrupted before he could finish. Fear explains panic, she said evenly. It does not explain planning. The room absorbed that distinction quietly. It settled into the air like a verdict waiting to be spoken. Then came the testimony that ended any remaining doubt. A private investigator Marcus had hired months earlier took the stand. He was a solid man with tired eyes, the kind of professional who had seen too much to be easily shaken. He explained how Marcus had approached him under the guise of concern, asking hypothetical questions about inheritance timelines and undetectable causes of death. At what point, the prosecutor asked, did you become concerned? The investigator paused. When the questions stopped being theoretical, he described the meeting in detail. The careful phrasing, the euphemisms, the way Marcus avoided certain words while making their meaning unmistakable. How did he phrase it? The prosecutor asked. The investigator swallowed. He said waiting for nature was taking too long. The courtroom stirred. Elaine gasped audibly, one hand flying to her mouth, as if the sound had escaped without permission. Her composure cracked then, just slightly. Tears followed soon after, though whether they were for Marcus, for herself, or for the collapse of her imagined future was unclear. Marcus stared straight ahead. When it was my turn to testify, I stood calmly and walked to the stand without hesitation. I did not look at the jury immediately. I adjusted the microphone, sat, and waited to be sworn in. I did not speak of betrayal. I did not speak of love or the absence of it. I spoke of facts, of recognition, of dosage, of patterns. I explained how the timing of symptoms corresponded with meals Marcus prepared, how the intensity increased incrementally, how certain dishes appeared more frequently than coincidence would allow. I described the moment I stopped doubting myself, not because the danger increased, but because it stabilized, because there was a rhythm to it, a plan. I explained why I switched the plates. Why not refuse the meal? The defense asked sharply, attempting to imply recklessness. Because refusal would have erased the evidence, I replied, and I would still be in danger. Silence followed, not the uncomfortable silence of uncertainty, but the settled quiet of understanding. The jury members shifted slightly, absorbing the logic of survival that had guided my choice. The judge took less than an hour to deliberate. Marcus was found guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, fraud, forgery. The sentence was lengthy long enough that he would grow old in a place without windows, measured not by seasons, but by routines imposed by others. Elaine received probation and a permanent restraining order. The court acknowledged her complicity without equating it to Marcus's intent. She stood as the verdict was read, tears streaming freely now, shaking with something that looked like remorse. But remorse after exposure is not repentance. It is fear wearing a mask. As Marcus was led away, he finally looked at me. Hatred, shock, and something else. Understanding. He had mistaken patience for weakness. That mistake cost him everything. Months later, Elaine came to the house one final time to collect what remained of her belongings. The house felt different by then, quieter, settled, no longer holding its breath. She stood in the doorway, smaller somehow, as if the space itself had outgrown her. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I nodded. Neither did I, until it did. She asked if I hated her. I told her the truth. Hate requires closeness, I said, and that's gone. She left quietly, closing the door with care, as if afraid of making noise in a life she no longer belonged to. I never saw her again. What I learned from all of this is simple. Kindness without boundaries invites predators. Silence enables evil. And age does not make you weak, it gives you perspective. I still sit at my dining table. I still cook my own meals. And I still trust my instincts. Because some lessons come late, but they come when they're needed most. The house is quiet now. Not the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your thoughts become unbearable. Not the hush that follows arguments, or the brittle silence that settles after a door has been slammed and no one knows who should speak first. This is a different quiet. It is clean. It is honest. It is the kind of quiet that arrives only after truth has finished doing its work. For the first time in years, I can hear myself breathe again. In the early mornings, before the sun fully lifts itself over the horizon, I wake without an alarm. My body has learned its own rhythms again. I rise slowly, deliberately, and I take a moment before standing just long enough to feel the floor beneath my feet and remind myself that I am still here. That matters more than it used to. I make my tea the same way every morning. I do not rush. I measure the leaves myself, pinching them carefully between my fingers the way my wife once taught me. She believed that tea, like most things worth doing, demanded attention. Care, she used to say, is not caution. It is respect. I boil the water myself. I wait for it not just until it is hot, but until it reaches the precise moment before rolling into impatience. Slowly, I watch the leaves unfurl, releasing their color like ink blooming in water. I drink standing by the window. That window looks out onto the garden my wife planted decades ago, when her hands were still steady and her knees still trusted the ground. The roses have grown wild since then. She never liked trimming them too aggressively. Let things live, she used to say. You can always cut back later. The air smells like soil and old leaves and damp stone. Nothing tastes strange anymore. Nothing smells wrong. That alone tells me how much has changed. For years, my senses whispered warnings I did not want to hear. Flavors slightly off. Aromas that carried an edge of bitterness where none belonged. Small inconsistencies dismissed as age or memory or imagination. We are taught to doubt ourselves as we grow older. It is a convenient lesson for everyone else. The cameras are still there. Discreet. Quiet. Watching. Some people tell me I should remove them now. They say the danger has passed. They say I deserve peace without surveillance, without reminders. They misunderstand something important. Safety is not the absence of threat. It is awareness. The cameras are not symbols of fear. They are acknowledgments of reality. They do not make me anxious. They make me honest. They remind me that trust is not a default setting, it is a decision, renewed daily, informed by evidence rather than hope. I lived too long believing otherwise. Marcus is serving his sentence now. I am told that prison strips people down to who they truly are, that it removes performance, excuses, and carefully constructed masks. I am told it reveals the core beneath. I do not wonder how he is doing. I already know. Some men mistake intelligence for entitlement. They believe that because they can manipulate, they deserve to. That because they can exploit, they are justified. Prison does not cure such men. It only confines them. Elaine moved away shortly after everything ended. I heard it through a mutual acquaintance say, careful sentence delivered with the distance people use when they don't want to choose sides. She relocated somewhere smaller, quieter, a town where anonymity is easier to maintain and histories dissolve faster. She has not contacted me again. That door is closed, not out of cruelty, but necessity. There is a difference between forgiveness and access, between letting go and letting back in. Forgiveness, if it comes at all, is internal. Access is practical and must be earned. Elaine knew the truth. She chose silence. Silence is not neutral. Silence is a decision. Forgiveness is not owed to those who saw harm unfolding and decided that comfort mattered more than conscience. I placed the house into a trust shortly after the trial. Some assumed it was fear that motivated me. Others suspected paranoia. They were wrong on both counts. It was clarity. Clarity prevents future conflict. Clarity leaves no room for interpretation, manipulation, or expectation. Boundaries protect more than walls ever could. I used to believe that walls were the ultimate defense, that locks and gates and deeds could secure what mattered. Ages taught me otherwise. Walls can be climbed, locks can be picked, but boundaries clearly drawn and firmly held are far more difficult to breach. In the evenings, when the light begins to soften and the world seems to exhale, I often sit in my study. The chessboard still rests where it always has, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. Some of the pieces have small chips, tiny imperfections earned through years of play. I like that. It makes them honest. I play against myself now. At first, it felt foolish. A man alone, moving both sides of the board. But I quickly learned something surprising. I am a tougher opponent than I expected. I hesitate less. I sacrifice pieces when necessary. I recognize patterns faster. I do not fall for the same tricks I once did. Chess teaches patience. So does age. Both teach you that the most dangerous moves are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, incremental. They unfold over time, disguised as kindness or concern. Looking back, people often ask me if I regret switching the plates. They phrase it carefully, as though afraid the answer might confirm something uncomfortable about themselves. They want reassurance that morality is simple. That danger looks obvious. That villains announce themselves. I do not give them that comfort. I tell them the truth. I did not poison anyone. I refuse to be poisoned. Marcus chose his actions. Marcus prepared the meal. Marcus consumed what he created. The consequences belong to him. What happened in this house was not revenge. Revenge seeks pain. What I sought was truth. Exposure. And exposure is what predators fear most. There's a dangerous myth about old age that it weakens you, that it dulls your senses, softens your judgment, and turns you into something smaller than you once were. The truth is the opposite. Age removes illusion. It strips away the stories we tell ourselves to stay comfortable. It forces you to confront patterns instead of excuses. It teaches you to notice what others overlook, to recognize repetition, to trust evidence over emotion. I was kind for most of my life. Generous, accommodating, patient. Those are good traits. But kindness without limits becomes permission. And permission invites exploitation. I learned that lesson late, but not too late. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Pay attention when something feels wrong, especially when it is wrapped in smiles and concern. Do not mistake familiarity for safety. Do not assume love guarantees loyalty. And never believe that silence means innocence. Some of the most dangerous betrayals happen at the dinner table. They arrive quietly. They were the face of family. They speak the language of care. I survived because I remembered who I was before age tried to shrink me. A man who knew his craft. A man who trusted evidence. A man who refused to disappear quietly for someone else's profit. I'm still here. The house is still mine. And every meal I eat now is prepared with my own hands, carefully, deliberately, and safely. I take my time. I taste everything. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, The difference between medicine and poison is not mystery. It is intention. Justice does not arrive with fireworks. It does not announce itself with shouting crowds or cinematic closure. It does not feel triumphant or even particularly emotional when it finally settles into place. Justice arrives with paperwork. It arrives in manila folders stacked neatly on polished desks, in clipped voices explaining timelines, in careful language designed to leave no ambiguity behind. It arrives slowly, methodically, indifferent to how long you have waited for it. In the weeks following the verdict, my days filled with meetings, conference rooms, offices that all smelled faintly the same coffee that had been reheated too many times, carpet cleaner trying unsuccessfully to mask age, printer toner lingering in the air like dust. I signed my name more times than I could count. Affidavits, property disclosures, victim impact statements written in language that had to be precise rather than emotional. The machinery of consequence moved forward without drama, without apology, without pause. It was not kind, but it was fair. Marcus's appeals were denied one by one. Each denial came with a letter carefully worded, legally airtight, unemotional. They cited precedent. They cited evidence. They cited procedure. There was no room left for interpretation. The evidence was too clean, too complete. The paper trail alone told the story more clearly than any testimony could have. Forged documents, altered signatures, a mortgage application submitted in my name, using my home as collateral, inflated well beyond $500,000. The numbers were not vague. They were exact. That application carried penalties severe enough to keep him incarcerated even if the attempted murder charges had somehow failed. They did not. There is something oddly sobering about watching the law dismantle a person's future piece by piece. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with quiet efficiency. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. Elaine's legal process unfolded differently. Quieter. She avoided cameras, avoided statements, avoided language that might require accountability beyond what her attorney could negotiate. The hearings were brief. The rooms smaller. The outcomes less visible to the public. Probation, mandatory counseling, a permanent restraining order. She would never again be allowed within several hundred feet of me or my property. When I signed the final documents formalizing that boundary, my hand did not shake. People expect grief in moments like that. They expect tears or rage or some visible sign of emotional rupture. What I felt instead was distance. Not new distance. The kind that forms slowly, invisibly, long before a courtroom ever becomes involved. Distance built from unanswered questions, from instincts ignored too long, from truths noticed but never spoken aloud. The papers did not create that distance. They simply acknowledged it. A few days later, Victor stopped by in the early evening. He did not call ahead. He never did. He understood that some visits were better unannounced, that they arrived with less obligation attached. He brought a chessboard under one arm and a bottle of wine in the other. "I'll open it," he said before I could speak. "Habit," he added, almost apologetically. "Wise one," I replied. We set the board up in the study. The familiar weight of the pieces felt grounding. Something about chess has always appealed to me, not the competition, but the structure, the honesty of it. Every piece moves according to rules that never change. There are no hidden motives on a chessboard, only choices and consequences. We played in silence for a while. Then, inevitably, he asked the question everyone eventually asked. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't noticed?" I did not answer immediately, because the truth was uncomfortable. Yes, I had wondered. In the early days, when sleep still came unevenly, I had followed that thought down its darker paths. I had imagined mornings that never arrived, decisions made on my behalf, a house that no longer belonged to me, a life reduced to a line item on someone else's balance sheet. "Yes," I said finally, "and I don't dwell on it." Victor nodded. That was the real victory, not survival. Survival is instinctive. Even animals manage that. The real victory was freedom from imagining alternate endings. Freedom from replaying scenarios that no longer mattered. Freedom from fear dictating the rest of my life. The trust paperwork finalized shortly after. My home, my remaining assets, the investment income from the pharmacy group I had helped build decades earlier, all secured in a structure designed not merely to protect, but to clarify. No single signature could undo it. No charm could bypass it. No emotional appeal could weaken it. It was not built on distrust. It was built on reality. I had learned, perhaps too late, but thoroughly, that clarity is a form of kindness to yourself most of all. On a quiet afternoon in early autumn, I turned my attention to something I had postponed for months. Elaine's things. The few boxes of her childhood belongings that remained in the house. Items she never came to collect. Items she likely avoided because they represented a version of herself untouched by the choices she later made. I opened the first box slowly. Old report cards, crayon drawings folded too many times, a cracked music box that played a melody slightly off-key, and a photograph. Elaine at 10 years old, grinning broadly, missing teeth, knees scraped, eyes bright with wild, unfiltered optimism. I studied that photograph for a long time. I did not cry. Grief requires proximity. What I felt was recognition. This was who she had been before compromise became habit, before silence replaced courage, before she learned how easy it was to look away. I closed the box, sealed it, placed it in storage. Some memories are not meant to be carried daily. The house changed after that. Not physically. The walls remained where they had always been. The floors creaked in the same places. The garden continued its stubborn, beautiful disorder. But something intangible shifted. The air felt lighter. The rooms no longer held tension in their corners. The silence no longer felt watchful. I slept through the night again. Deep, uninterrupted sleep, the kind that only comes when your mind no longer feels hunted. I resumed routines I had quietly abandoned without noticing. Morning walks, gardening, reading without checking the clock or listening for footsteps. One afternoon, I found myself reorganizing the kitchen. Not because someone suggested it, not because it was practical, but because I wanted to. That difference matters more than people realize. Occasionally, letters still arrive from strangers. Some call me clever. Others call me cruel. A few call me lucky. They are all wrong. Luck is random. What saved me was attention. Attention to detail. Attention to patterns. Attention to the way people behave when they believe you are not watching. Age did not make me fragile. It made me precise. There is a moment every older person faces, though few speak of it openly. It is the moment when conversations begin happening around you instead of with you. When decisions are framed as conveniences. When others begin making plans that quietly exclude your consent. Plans about your money, your home, your timeline. That is the moment when you must decide whether you will fade politely or stand clearly. I chose clarity. Months later, while traveling alone through a small coastal town, I sat in a cafe overlooking the water. The afternoon was mild, the kind of day that does not demand anything from you. The waitress approached and asked if I was waiting for someone. No, I said, just enjoying my time. She smiled, as if that answer surprised her. It shouldn't have. Solitude, when chosen, is not loneliness. It is sovereignty. On my last night there, I returned to the same cafe, ordered a simple meal, poured my own glass of wine. I raised it quietly and thought briefly of Marcus, of the hours he must spend replaying his choices, of the moment he realized I was not the man he thought I was. I felt no satisfaction in that thought, only finality. The world is full of people who believe they can take what does not belong to them if they're clever enough, charming enough, or ruthless enough. They rely on others being passive. I was not, and I will not be again. So if you're listening to this story and something about it unsettles you, understand this. That discomfort is not an accident. It is your instincts asking to be heard. Listen to them. Pay attention to patterns. Protect what is yours. And never assume that age makes you expendable. Some of us have simply learned how to survive quietly, until quiet is no longer an option. There is one last thing I want to say. If you're older, quieter, or underestimated, that does not make you weak. It makes you invisible to the careless. And invisibility, when paired with awareness, is a powerful shield. I survived not because I was stronger than my enemy, but because I noticed what he assumed I never would. So tonight, when you sit down to eat, when someone smiles a little too carefully, when something feels just slightly off, remember this story. Trust patterns. Trust evidence. Trust yourself. Because the most dangerous people are not strangers. They are the ones who think you will never see them coming.